are here with Gordon Brown, professor at the University of Aberdeen and director of Medical Center, MRC Center for Medical Mycology. Hi, Gordon.
Good morning.
So, first of all, could you please explain your research interests and the work carried out in your lab?
So what I'm interested in is how the immune system recognizes fungal pathogens, and we are focused on a bunch of receptors that are found on the cell surface of primarily immune cells, but also on other cell types that are able to recognize structures on fungi, and those are mostly sugars. And what's interesting about these receptors is they are the very first molecules that indicate an infection. They are sensing molecules, and they have the capacity to trigger intracellular signaling. And these intracellular signals induce a variety of responses, so they allow the immune cells to take up and kill the fungal pathogens, induce inflammatory responses, and if that's not sufficient to eradicate the organism, then they drive the development of adaptive immunity, which then generates pathogen-specific immunity and long-term memory.
Okay. Why did you decide to get involved in this field of study initially?
Serendipity, so luck. So I was a postdoc coming from South Africa, and I went to the laboratory of Simon Gordon, who's a very well-known macrophage biologist. And in those days, which was the early 90s, there was all this discovery on pattern recognition receptors. The tolls had just been discovered by Jules Hoffman and Bruce Beutler and others. And Simon said to me, why don't you come to my lab and look for macrophage receptors? And so I did that. And we came up with a strategy that would screen in a very unbiased way for novel receptors that would look for pathogens. Yeah. And one of the things that we included in that screen, very fortunately for me, was zymazan, which is a fungal cell wall-derived compound. And when we screened this library in an unbiased way, I discovered this one receptor. And that turned out to be Dectin-1. And at the time, we didn't know the significance of that discovery. But it turns out to be the major beta-glucan, which is one of these fungal cell wall components, receptor on macrophages, allowing it to recognize fungi. So I went from a microbiology, immunology background to becoming a mycology background by this serendipitous discovery in my postdoc. And my rest of my career has been spent studying these receptors and how they interact with fungal organisms.
Last August, the Aberdeen Fungal Group, in collaboration with the University of Cape Town, opened the world's first international research center for tackling fungal infections. How did you, of course with AFG and UCT, achieve this objective, which is the main aim of this center?
So we were very lucky that there was an endowment to the University of Aberdeen, and the University of Aberdeen some years ago put out a bid system, or offered a bid to any group in Aberdeen who would come up with something that would increase the university's international ranking. And being the Aberdeen Fungal Group, we realized this was a very good opportunity to establish an international center for medical mycology in a place where there's a lot of fungal disease but no expertise, or very little expertise. And having come from South Africa and having come from Cape Town, I used that link to establish the center. And so the money so we won the bid obviously, and the money that came from that bid was used to establish the center. Now you asked about the objectives. So we really have, there's three main objectives. Firstly is to increase capacity. So as you know, fungal infections kill well over 1 million people every year, but we have very few people working in this area. So one of the things that we want to do is to increase capacity. And in Africa, they have one of the biggest burdens of fungal disease, but very few people working it. So the idea is to do a training program, to set up a center that we can do training, both at a sort of advanced scientific level, but also at a basic level. So we'll run courses in mycology and diagnostics and things like that we plan to run for a lot of people in South Africa, but also the rest of Africa. And we've already run one of those courses last year. The second aim is really to establish a research base for medical mycology in Africa. So there's no group specifically focused on fungal diseases. There are some interests in several areas and several people, but nothing focused, and there's no resource for that. And then the third thing is really the third aim is really to establish links between Aberdeen and the rest of the UK and Africa to really facilitate this transfer of knowledge backwards and forwards.
In medical research, the ultimate goal is the translation of primary research into clinics and hospitals, so the patient is the final priority. Having experience in all of these stages, which do you feel is the most rewarding?
I think it's all rewarding. It's very nice to see your work translated into patient benefit, but as a basic scientist, you very rarely get that opportunity. So our objectives are always to try and advance patient care. But in reality, when you do bench work, the translation between the bench work and the impact in patients is often so long and involves so many other people that the scientist involved in the original discovery very often is not involved in that. I've been very lucky in my laboratory. We discovered a fungal skin disease called chromoblastomycosis. In fact, this picture on the screen behind me is of this very lovely but very horrible organism. It causes this disease. And we discovered that if we could cure it by adding a specific agonist of these receptors, and that we've translated, we tested it in patients and it worked very, very excitingly, and we're now trying to get money together to do a proper clinical trial. So I have actually been in the fortunate position where I've been able to translate my research, but a lot of the time that's not possible.
Just the last question. You are a well-known scientist who has been listed also in 2017 highly cited researchers list. What advice would you give to young scientists who just started their careers, and which do you think is the most important characteristic that scientists need to have?
Well, I think you need to have passion and perseverance. So science is filled with ups and downs, a bit like a roller coaster ride. So quite often you have the highs of discovery, which are fantastic, and then there's the downs of failure. And there's a lot more failure in science than there is discovery. So you have to do experiments many times. They don't work. You have to figure out how to do the experiments quite often. And so perseverance is the one very important aspect. But I think ultimately, to be a successful scientist, you have to have passion. And I think you'll hear that from most other people who've made it. If you don't have the passion and drive to do it, to get through all these ups and downs, then it's unlikely you will make it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Sure. Thank you.